I had always preferred the concept of camping over its actual experience. The insects, the dubious restrooms, and the unpredictable weather were never elements that resonated with the idea of a vacation for me. However, when Ryan invited me to join his family on their yearly excursion, I agreed without hesitation because it was Ryan, and I had never been adept at declining his requests. We had been best friends since our high school days, a bond forged through bad films, lengthy text conversations, and a profound understanding of one another. Ryan embodied the golden retriever persona, effortlessly charming, radiating warmth and vitality. His family mirrored his personality, boisterous, adventurous, and always organizing the next hiking or fishing adventure. In contrast, I was not. Yet, I craved a respite. He assured me there would be a lake, a campfire, and no expectations. Thus, I gathered my belongings and met them at dawn outside their suburban home, where their SUV and trailer were already packed to the brim. Ryan tossed me a Red Bull with a grin, welcoming me to the chaos. The 5-hour drive was filled with laughter, snacks, and his younger cousins belting out Taylor Swift songs at full volume. However, as we approached the woods, a knot of nervous energy began to form in my stomach, not unpleasant, just a low buzz beneath my skin. We arrived in the late afternoon. The campsite was situated in a clearing by a lake, encircled by towering pines and the faint sound of water gently lapping against the rocks. There was a serene quality to it, pristine and almost sacred. As I exited the car and stretched, I heard a deep voice behind me say, "You must be the city friend." I turned to see Mason, Ryan's older brother. I had encountered him a few times in the past, but it had been years since. He appeared taller than I remembered, broader as well, with sun-kissed skin and a weary, inscrutable expression. He wore a flannel shirt partially buttoned over a tank top, cargo shorts, and boots that seemed to have traversed continents. "Guilty," I replied, mustering a small smile. "You must be the wilderness expert." He raised an eyebrow. "Something like that." Ryan leaped between us, smiling broadly. Mason had just returned from Oregon. He has essentially become part tree now. Do not pay him any mind. He possesses a resting forest face. Mason rolled his eyes but refrained from arguing. There was a brief pause. He glanced at me once more. Not unkindly, merely for a moment. Too long. The following hours slipped by in a haze of unpacking, hammering stakes, and attempting to avoid embarrassing myself while setting up the tents. By the time the sun sank low, casting golden light across the treetops, the sleeping arrangements were still being finalized. "All right," Ryan stated, holding up a list and squinting at the scribbles. "So, we are one tent short." Naturally. I surveyed the area, uncertain of where I would end up. Under a tarp, in the car? Before I could suggest sleeping on a log or something similar, Mason interjected. "He can share with me," he said as if it were nothing, as if we were not practically strangers. Ryan nodded, already moving on. "Perfect," I blinked. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to." "It's all right," Mason replied, not quite meeting my gaze. Then, with a half-smile that was not entirely a smile, "I suppose we are sharing then." My heart fluttered slightly. I laughed it off, muttered something like "cool," and began to unroll my sleeping bag next to his. But all I could think about was how close our mats would be, how small the tent appeared from the outside, and how his voice had sounded casual, yes, but not careless. That night, as we gathered around the campfire consuming charred marshmallows and sharing stories, I attempted not to glance over at him too frequently, yet I felt it. That quiet awareness, that peculiar gravity drawing me nearer. And I realized, even before we zipped up that tent and lay in the dim, pine-scented silence, this trip was destined to alter something. Perhaps everything. It is strange how loud the woods become when all else is silent. Crickets, the wind rustling through the pines, the occasional snap of a twig, or distant rustling. And beside me, Mason's steady breathing, slow and tranquil, like he was meant to sleep on the ground. Meanwhile, I lay flat on my back, eyes wide open, observing shadows creep across the nylon ceiling of the tent. It wasn't merely the strange environment that kept me awake. It was the reality that Mason was merely 2 feet away, perhaps even less. We had zipped our sleeping bags side by side on the tarp-covered floor. His was partially unzipped, one arm resting above his head. I had caught glimpses of his tattoo in the firelight earlier, something small on the inside of his bicep, nearly concealed beneath the edge of his sleeve. I didn't want to stare. Yet I did. He shifted slightly and emitted a soft sigh. The kind you don't intend for anyone to hear. I focused on the tent ceiling. Get it together. I turned onto my side, facing the tent wall, attempting to will myself into slumber, but my mind didn't comply. It wandered as it always did at night, into realms I didn't always allow it to explore during the day. I hadn't truly dated anyone. Not seriously. I reassured myself it was merely because I was busy or cautious or shy. But the reality was, I had spent a considerable amount of time fearful of what might occur if someone saw too much of me and then chose they didn't want it. I wasn't even out to Ryan. Not officially, he had probably surmised. But we never discussed it. I think a part of me was anticipating the right moment. Or perhaps the right person. A gentle chuckle disrupted the silence. I turned slightly. Mason was awake. You breathe really loudly when you're overthinking, he said, his voice low and warm. I froze. I do not. He laughed again, just under his breath. You do. It's like intense philosophical breathing. I rolled onto my back once more. Well, I'm trying not to freeze to death or be devoured by raccoons, so perhaps cut me some slack. He turned toward me. I could just barely make out his face. Faint outlines illuminated by the soft glow of the moon through the thin tent wall. Afraid of raccoons? He asked deeply. Noted, he said. I'll protect you. The way he expressed it wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't mocking. It was light, yet sincere. There was a moment of silence. Do you know any constellations? He asked abruptly. Only the simple ones, such as Orion and the Big Dipper. Classic, he remarked. Lazy, yet classic. You didn't seem like a constellation snob. I encompass multitudes, he said, with a hint of mockery. Serious. I chuckled, finally allowing myself to unwind a bit. What else do you encompass? He paused for a moment, as if pondering the question. Regret, he replied softly. Too many unfinished endeavors. An everlasting affection for gas station donuts. I turned to him again, taken aback. You are full of surprises, he smirked, his eyes barely visible. And you are nothing like Ryan's other friends. The words lingered in the air. My breath caught slightly. Yeah, how so? They are loud, somewhat superficial. I'll admit, he said. You are quieter, but not devoid of substance. It feels like there is a lot happening beneath the surface. I was at a loss for words. No one had ever expressed anything like that to me before. Not in a manner that felt genuine, he added, his tone now subdued. I observe things. That silence returned, denser now, as if the tent had constricted around us. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. A few raindrops began to patter against the nylon. Mason remained silent. I did too, but I no longer felt the need to speak. Something had changed. Not in a dramatic cinematic way, just a thread drawn taut between us. A hum in the darkness. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep. Not because I was free of anxiety, but because for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to pretend otherwise. The following morning, Ryan roused everyone by banging a spatula on a pan like a crazed camp counselor. Rise and shine, campers, he yelled. Hike day. I groaned into my sleeping bag. Somewhere beside me, Mason muttered something that sounded like, I'm going to bury him in the woods. We emerged from the tent into the soft golden light of early morning. The trees filtered the sunlight into long beams, and the air was crisp enough to make my skin tingle. Everyone had a quick breakfast of oatmeal and instant coffee, then packed water bottles and trail mix for the hike Ryan had been eagerly anticipating since the drive-in. It was supposed to be a moderate trail. Ryan's interpretation of moderate, I soon discovered, involved a series of relentless uphill ascents interrupted only by picturesque overlooks and his exclamations of, "Isn't this epic?" By the time we arrived at the first overlook, I was soaked in sweat and contemplating whether I could feign a sprained ankle to escape. Somewhere along the second mile, the group naturally dispersed. Ryan was leading the way at the front with the younger children, a few adults lagging behind, and I found myself in the middle alongside Mason. I hadn't intended to walk next to him, but when I paused to tie my shoe, he did as well. And when I resumed my pace, his footsteps synchronized with mine. Initially, we remained silent, just walking. It felt surprisingly effortless. Moving in rhythm with him, as if we had been hiking together for years. The sound of our boots crunching on the dirt, birds calling above, leaves brushing against our arms as the path narrowed. All of it brought a sense of calm within me. You're quiet today, Mason remarked eventually. Trying to conserve oxygen, I replied, panting. He smiled. That makes sense. A few more steps, then he continued. I took a break from medical school this year. I looked at him, taken aback. I didn't realize you were in medical school. Yeah, 3 years in. I got burned out. I couldn't determine if I was pursuing it for myself or for others. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press him. I simply nodded, allowing the silence to return without feeling the need to fill it. He added a while later. Do you ever feel that way? Like you're uncertain if you're living your own life or someone else's vision of it. I glanced over more than I would like to admit. Just ahead, the trail inclined. I misstepped on a loose rock and stumbled slightly. Without thinking, Mason reached out, one hand on my arm, the other gently brushing my lower back to steady me. "Easy," he said. I froze for a moment. Not due to the stumble, but because of the way his hand lingered. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a few seconds, but it was enough. Enough to make my skin burn where he touched me. Enough to make me look at him a bit longer than I should have. He gradually released his grip and continued walking as if nothing had occurred, yet something had indeed transpired. Later that afternoon, we returned to camp, feeling sweaty, sore, and dazed from the sun. Ryan declared his intention to take a nap in the hammock, prompting most of the others to disperse and do likewise. I changed into my swim trunks and made my way to the lake to refresh myself. The water was ideal, cold yet invigorating, the type of cold that jolted you awake. I plunged beneath the surface, resurfacing with gasps of laughter. A few of the children joined in, splashing around and performing cannonballs off the old dock. I glanced back at the shore and noticed Mason sitting on a log, partially shaded. He was not conversing with anyone, he was simply observing, watching me intently. My stomach experienced that annoying fluttering sensation once more. I submerged myself underwater and lingered there for a time. That evening, we gathered around the fire, roasting hot dogs and engaging in card games. Mason was relatively quiet, but I could sense his presence beside me. Not in a physical sense, but in that subtle electric way, as if we were in sync with the same static. When it was time to retire for the night, we made our way back to the tent. I picked up my toothbrush and stepped outside to rinse my mouth. Upon my return, Mason was already in the process of changing his shirt, his back turned, arms raised, skin exposed from the waist up. I halted in the doorway. The firelight from outside cast a soft golden hue across his shoulders. He slowly pulled down his shirt, then hesitated. "I can feel you staring," he remarked without turning around. I nearly dropped my toothbrush. "I wasn't," I stammered. "It's fine," he replied, sliding the shirt down completely. Then he glanced over his shoulder. "You weren't exactly discreet." I couldn't determine if he was teasing or confronting me. Perhaps a bit of both. I laughed awkwardly, feeling caught. He smirked and settled into his sleeping bag as if we hadn't just shared the most significant moment of my life. I lay down as well, my heart racing. Neither of us spoke again, but the silence felt altered now. It was not empty, it was filled with something unexpressed, waiting to be articulated. That night, the fire crackled more loudly than usual, or perhaps it merely seemed that way. Another group had arrived at a nearby campsite earlier in the day. Some friends of Ryan's cousins, apparently. And now they'd pulled their folding chairs into our circle like they'd always belonged. Most of them were loud, easygoing beer and hand types. One of them, a girl in a red hoodie and cut-off shorts, seemed particularly taken with Mason. I noticed it right away. The way she angled her chair toward him. The way she kept laughing at things that weren't funny. The way she touched his arm when she made a joke, casual, intentional. Like she was planting a flag. Mason didn't exactly flirt back, but he didn't pull away either. He just smiled, nodded, said a few words here and there. The same kind of polite indifference he gave to everyone except me. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that. I tried not To care. I really did. But the longer I watched her lean in, the more my chest felt tight. Not in a dramatic, broken-hearted way. More like a slow ache. The kind that creeps in without warning. Ryan nudged me at one point. You good? Yeah, I lied. I stared into the fire and said nothing for the rest of the night. Back at the tent, the silence between Mason and me felt heavier than usual. He changed without comment. I didn't even look this time. I climbed into my sleeping bag and zipped it halfway, turning onto my side, facing away. I wasn't even tired. Just desperate to be horizontal, quiet, invisible. The tent rustled then. You've been weird tonight. I kept my eyes closed. No, I haven't. A pause. Then his voice softer. What's up with you? Nothing, he let out a breath. Liar. I rolled over and looked at him. I just wasn't in the mood to socialize. He said like he didn't believe that for a second. So, totally unrelated. How'd you feel about flirty hoodie girl? I blinked. Why would I care? He shrugged. You tell me. Another pause. The silence between us was loud. Louder than any crackling fire or rustling leaves. It felt like standing on a cliff edge, wind in your ears, wondering whether you were about to fall or be caught. Mason regarded me intently, his voice lowered and measured. It's all right, you know, if that's what this is. I swallowed hard. What? He maintained his gaze. You know what? My throat constricted. My heart was beating loudly enough that I was certain he could hear it. I remained silent. I replied, you didn't have to. I glanced down at my hands, fingers entwined in the zipper of the sleeping bag. I wished to articulate something witty, courageous, or sincere, but all I could manage was, I don't know. Mason nodded slowly, not expressing disappointment or anger, merely acceptance. That's okay, too. We fell silent after that. He turned onto his back, gazing at the tent's ceiling. I lay on my side, eyes wide open, staring into emptiness, heart racing. Outside, the fire dwindled to glowing embers. Laughter from another campsite echoed faintly, then faded into the sound of wind rustling through the trees. Inside, we both lay motionless, breathing, contemplating, perhaps feeling too intensely. And although no words were exchanged, something significant had been communicated. The storm struck just after midnight. It began with a low, distant rumble, akin to a growl hidden beneath the hills. Then the wind arrived, sudden and fierce, tearing through the trees as if it had been waiting for its moment. I sat up in the tent just as the rain began to pelt the nylon above us like 1,000 pebbles thrown at once. Outside, someone was shouting. Then another voice, Ryan's, issuing commands. Get the tarps down. Cover the food. Mason unzipped the tent in one fluid motion. Come on, he urged. Before I could protest, he was already outside in the storm. I fumbled for my hoodie and crawled after him into the turmoil. The world outside had transformed into a gray frenzy. The fire was extinguished, submerged in steam and smoke. Ryan dashed across the clearing with a bundle of equipment. One of the children was chasing after a wayward cooler lid. Water soaked my shoes immediately, cold and muddy. Mason seized the corner of a tarp that had come loose and gestured for me to hold the opposite side. We stretched it across a stack of supplies. attempting to secure it as the wind whipped it like a sail. "Can you hold that?" he shouted. "I'm trying." The rain intensified, streaming down the back of my neck, soaking through every layer. Thunder rumbled above us, close enough to shake my chest. I lost my grip on the tarp once. Mason caught it with one hand, and my wrist with the other. "Got you," he said. I nodded, my teeth chattering. Once things were mostly secured, the adult instructed the kids to return to their tents. Ryan waved at us from the fire pit, then ducked into his hammock shelter. Mason and I stood there, drenched and shivering, the storm still raging around us. He nodded his chin toward our tent. "Let's go." Inside, it was hardly better. The air was humid and sticky, the floor damp from the flap left ajar. We removed our wet jackets and tossed them in the corner. I peeled off my hoodie and stood there in my undershirt, breathing heavily, my heart still pounding from the adrenaline. Mason ran a hand through his soaked hair. Drops of water slid down his face, clinging to his jaw. He looked at me. I looked back. Neither of us spoke. Outside, thunder rolled again. The tent illuminated for a moment in a flash of silver. "I can't feel my toes," I muttered, attempting to laugh. Mason did not laugh. He was still observing me. Not as before. Something had changed. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full. Full of everything we had not said. Everything we had been trying to avoid. He took a slow step forward. I did not move. Did not breathe. "Mason," I whispered. He halted in front of me, close enough that I could see the way. His pulse moved just beneath the skin of his throat. Rain dripped from his eyelashes. "I have been trying not to do this," he said, his voice low. Then he leaned in. It was not sudden. It was not hurried. His hand found the side of my face, warm, steady, and then his mouth was on mine. I melted. Not from the kiss itself, but from the weight behind it. The way it contained all the questions, all the quiet moments. All the things we had not been able to express in front of others lingered in the air. His lips were soft, moist, and initially hesitant, but soon became more assured. My hands grasped the hem of his shirt, not to remove it, but to anchor myself to something tangible. We gradually separated, our breaths intertwining. I attempted to speak, but the words eluded me. He leaned his forehead against mine, and I remained silent as well. Outside, the rain intensified. Lightning illuminated the sky once more. The air was infused with the sense of earth, smoke, and something unfamiliar. We chose not to speak again, it was unnecessary. We nestled into our sleeping bags, close together, not side by side, but intertwined, our limbs entangled beneath the fabric. There was no urgency, no boldness, just the serene pulse of two individuals who had finally ceased to pretend. Amidst the storm, I drifted into slumber with his hand clasped in mine. When I awoke, the world was tranquil. It was not the stillness of night, but a unique kind of quiet that exists only in the early morning, soft and enveloped in mist, where even the birds seemed to murmur. Fog hung low over the forest floor, casting a silvery hue to the air beyond the mesh of our tent. The storm had subsided, yet its essence lingered in the damp earth and the rich aroma of pine. I remained still for a moment, not moving. Mason was still asleep beside me, half on his stomach, one arm tucked beneath his cheek, the other barely brushing against mine. His hair was tousled, sticking up in various directions. The silhouette of his shoulder rose and fell gently beneath the fabric of his shirt. He appeared serene, uncomplicated, as if nothing from the previous night had altered anything. Yet everything had changed. I gazed at the tent's ceiling, my heart beating softly, a question cycling through my thoughts repeatedly. What comes next? We had not truly conversed. There had been no grand declarations, no confessions. Just that kiss, warm, tentative, genuine, and the silence that followed, which felt more substantial than any words could convey. However, now that night had faded, the weight of daylight felt altered, slightly heavier, and a bit more sincere. Mason stirred, his eyes opening slowly, initially unfocused. Then, they found me. For a brief moment, we simply gazed at one another. Then he smiled, a sleepy and gentle smile, the kind reserved for moments when there is no need for pretense. "Hey," he whispered. "Hey," he replied, turning onto his side and brushing his hair away from his forehead. "Are you okay?" I nodded, although my throat felt slightly constricted. "Yes, I believe so." He reached out softly, caressing the side of my face with the back of his hand. Then, he leaned in and placed a kiss on my forehead, lingering lightly. There were no explanations, no expectations, just that simple gesture. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, tranquility enveloped us. We lay close together, not entwined as we had been the previous night, but near enough that my knee brushed against his when we heard footsteps outside the tent. A voice called out, cheerful and unaware. "Are you two alive in there, or did the storm whisk you away, Ryan?" I sat up abruptly just as the zipper began to move. Mason reacted swiftly, rolling onto his back and casually withdrawing his arm. I grasped the edge of my sleeping bag and pulled it up to my chest, my heart racing in my ears. The flap opened, and Ryan poked his head inside, his hair tousled and a granola bar dangling from his mouth. "Nice of you two to sleep in. Come on, the fog is unbelievable. It looks like a scene from a horror movie out here." He appeared oblivious to anything amiss, or perhaps he chose not to acknowledge it. Mason smiled, unfazed. "Give us 10 minutes. Ryan gave a thumbs up and vanished. The flap zipped shut once more. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Mason glanced at me, amused. "You panicked." "Just a little bit." He reached for his hoodie and pulled it over his head, likely unaware of my reaction. I remained seated, my knees drawn to my chest, staring at the faint condensation on the tent wall. He turned to me again, his expression serious. "Listen, about last night." I tensed. "Yes?" He hesitated before continuing. "I don't regret it." My chest constricted. "I'm not entirely sure what this is," he added, "and I understand we will need to discuss it eventually, but we can figure it out if you're willing." I met his gaze. His eyes were not seeking a promise. Just an answer. I nodded. "Yes, I want to." He smiled again, slightly lopsided, a bit shy. "Great," he said. Just that, and somehow it was enough. Outside, the fog was starting to lift. And for the first time in a long while, so was the burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. Packing was quieter than I had anticipated. The sun rose behind the trees in soft streaks of pink and gold, and everyone moved a bit slower than usual. Perhaps due to the storm, or maybe because of the heaviness of leaving. The tents were taken down, bags zipped, coolers emptied and repacked. Sleeping bags were tightly rolled and shoved into the trunk. Ryan buzzed around the camp like a camp counselor on espresso, narrating the process in a dreadful Australian accent. The younger cousins laughed. One of the adults attempted to hush him, but he was unfazed. It was all part of the rhythm. Everyone playing their part. Mine felt different this morning. I kept catching Mason's gaze across the campsite. Brief exchanges while folding tarps, securing gear, brushing past each other at the car. He never looked away first. Just gave me that half-smile. The one that meant something only I understood now. I was uncertain about what to do with it, what would come next, or if there even was a next. The ride back began with music and snacks, and Ryan listing every conspiracy theory he believed regarding national parks. He was sitting next to me in the back seat, one headphone in, scrolling on his phone and showing me memes every 5 minutes. Mason was driving. He didn't say much, but his eyes met mine in the rearview mirror more than once. Each time, something warm curled in my chest. Steady and quiet. No one else in the car was aware of what had shifted between us, but I felt it in every unspoken moment. The air between us was filled with something unnameable, yet real. A couple of hours in, we stopped at a gas station to stretch and refill. Everyone dispersed. Bathrooms, vending machines, coffee runs. I stepped out of the car, the heat of the pavement rising up through my sneakers. I made my way to the side lot to take a moment to breathe when Mason suddenly appeared next to me. "Hey," he greeted. "Hey." We stood there, pretending that the noise of traffic and soda machines was sufficient to fill the void of silence. Then Mason turned his gaze towards me. "Really looked. This doesn't end here," he stated. My heart skipped a beat. "Unless you want it to," he added in a softer tone. I shook my head before he could complete his thought. "I don't." Something in his shoulders relaxed. He stepped closer, and I thought he might kiss me, but he refrained. Instead, he quickly wrapped his arms around me, strong and fast, then released just as swiftly, just enough to convey what he couldn't articulate. I embraced him back, gripping his shirt for a moment longer than I intended. When we separated, he smiled once more. It was a crooked, weary, yet sincere smile. "Get in the car," he instructed, "before Ryan arrives and spoils this moment with a fart joke." The remainder of the ride was uneventful. I feigned sleep, while Ryan genuinely dozed off. Mason remained silent, but just before we reached Ryan's driveway, he looked back and shared a brief glance with me, heavy with unspoken meaning. Later that evening, after dinner and a lengthy shower, I unzipped my bag to unpack. Something fluttered out from among my clothes, a folded piece of paper. I stared at it for a moment before unfolding it. His handwriting was untidy, as if hastily scrawled. "Next time, maybe just us, me," I read it twice. Then I settled back on my bed, clutching the note to my chest, grinning like a fool in the stillness of my room. I was uncertain about what the future held. I had no idea what we would label this or where it might lead. But one thing was clear.